interesting developments in the story about how some Trump campaign people were apparently listened in on by intelligence. Now, Trump famously said that Obama had ordered a wiretap of Trump Tower. Now, that is not true. It's not President Obama who would have ordered it or who did order it, and there was no wiretap of Trump Tower. But as I said on day one of that, there could be elements of truth in it, that it might have been that somebody inside Trump Tower was listened on for a number of different reasons. Since then, we have some indication that that has in fact happened. Now, the way that it normally works, and might have worked in this case based on what even Republicans have said, is that our intelligence officials would be listening in on foreign officials. Now, when they do that, and sometimes, for example, they'll listen on the Russian ambassador. That's how they caught Mike Flynn. They were not wiretapping Mike Flynn. They were not listening in on Trump administration, or at that time, Trump campaign people. They were actually following the Russian ambassador, something we do on a regular basis. Now, if those type of calls came into the Trump team at Trump Tower, there could be a record of them, and likely there is. Now, the question is, do you unmask the Americans on the other end of the call? Because regular procedure is, okay, we've got a call here from a foreigner that we're tracking for whatever reason, and they're talking to an American. Normally those names are masked because you cannot listen in on Americans without a warrant. That used to be the old rules. Now the rules are much looser, and I think disastrously so, and they might have been in effect here, which allowed some possibly Obama administration officials to find out who it was that those foreign entities were talking to on the Trump team. A story out today from Bloomberg saying that the person who asked for those identities to be unmasked was Susan Rice. Now, Susan Rice, of course, top advisor to President Obama. Let's find out more about this. White House lawyers, according to Bloomberg, last month learned that former National Security Advisor Susan Rice requested the identities of US persons in raw intelligence reports on dozens of occasions that connect to the Donald Trump transition and campaign, according to US officials familiar with the matter. Now, it is super relevant whether she was doing that for national security reasons or political reasons. I'll get back to whether she was breaking the law or not at the end. Let me give you more details first so you understand the story. The intelligence reports were summaries of monitored conversations, primarily between foreign officials discussing the Trump transition, but also in some cases direct contact between members of the Trump team and monitored foreign officials. So exactly as I was explaining to you before, and we've explained in previous instances, it looks like they are actually monitoring the foreign officials, not the Trump guys, but those foreign officials talked to the Trump team during the campaign. So now let's go further. One US official familiar with the reports said they contain valuable political information on the Trump transition, such as whom the Trump team was meeting, the views of Trump associates on foreign policy matters, and plans for the incoming administration. Now, if it's at the time that they've already won the race, I'd be dramatically surprised, but you have to open the possibility that it could happen, that Susan Rice would want to know what their political plans for the next administration is. They'll find that out soon enough. During the campaign, there would be far more sensitive political information that they could use for political reasons. That is not hard to imagine. Now, I know that these people are deeply respected in Washington. That doesn't mean they didn't do it. And now whether it was for political reasons or national security reasons, giant question, because if it's for national security reasons, that means Susan Rice, the national security advisor, had good reason to suspect that the Trump team was in fact working with the Russians, and she had evidence to that effect. That's disastrous for the Trump team. If it turns out it was for political reasons, that's disastrous for Susan Rice, because she's not supposed to do that. That would be illegal. But you would have to prove intent, which is going to be very hard to do, that she intended to listen in on those calls and unmask the Trump team and find out who was on the opposite end of those calls for political reasons. That intent, again, very hard to prove. Now, Susan Rice did comment about this before Bloomberg broke this story. And by the way, this is not a right-wing outlet. This is a legitimate media organization. Susan Rice in the past had said, I know nothing about this, meaning the calls. I was surprised to see reports from Chairman Nunes on that account today. If Bloomberg sources are right and she unmasked the identities of the Trump team, well, certainly she knew something about those calls. And so that would be a fairly significant lie there. Now, Susan Rice is not above politics. I thought she was the one person during the Benghazi stuff that actually acted in a way that was not as honest as she could have been, and I'm being very polite here. So look, I think, as I've said to you dozens of times, as 9 Republican investigations have shown, there was no actual illegal activity in Benghazi. There was nothing to prosecute. There was nothing there. But at the time of those activities and the bombings and the killings in Benghazi, Susan Rice did go on television and seemed to try to direct attention away from it and pretend that it was about a video. And that was a misdirection that was totally needless and political. So I'm not in the camp of, oh my God, these beloved Obama administration officials would never do anything political. I don't know. I reserve judgment on that. So if this reporting is accurate, we might never know why Rice found out or decided to unmask those Trump team officials, but it could go either way. So let me conclude here with one more thing that's very important. Rice's multiple requests to learn the identities of Trump officials discussed in the intelligence reports during the transition period does highlight a long-standing concern for civil liberties advocates about US surveillance programs. The standard for senior officials to learn the names of US persons incidentally collected is that it must have some foreign intelligence value, a standard that can apply to almost anything. This suggests Rice's unmasking requests were likely within the law. But the reason I bring that up to you is not to say, hey, there's nothing to look at here and Susan Rice didn't do anything wrong. I'm not in that camp. I'm in the camp and have always been in the camp of the laws are wrong. They always tell us, don't worry, the NSA is not gonna actually listen in on Americans. And it turns out, well, if you're talking to someone outside the country or a foreigner, they can easily, without a court order, unmask your identity. In this case, it happens to be the Trump team and it becomes a major political issue to be bandied back and forth. But what I care more about is the substance of the laws. If they can do it to the Trump team, they can do it to you. And look, if you thought there's a reason to suspect that these guys are working with foreign agents, hey, let's go to a court, let's get a warrant, and let's find out who's talking to these foreign agents and see if they're up to no good. In fact, at that point, if you've got good evidence on them, go ahead and wiretap them. That's how our system of law is supposed to work. That's how our Constitution is supposed to work. Instead, they changed it in the middle of the night, and back when the Republicans thought it was helping them, they happily agreed, the Democrats agreed, and what do we have? The government has more and more power. And now, even though they swore up and down that they wouldn't unmask American identities, at the drop of a hat, even in the midst of deeply political situation, they unmask American identities without going to court and just the executive branch deciding within their own power, we're gonna listen in on you, and there's nothing you can do about it. Doesn't matter how unconstitutional it appears to be, Republicans and Democrats have agreed that they are going to abuse that power together. So now, given that it's political, the Republicans will complain very loudly about it. But when these laws were being passed, they didn't say a word. They loved the idea of that kind of power residing within the government. Now it's come back to bite them. So they can go ahead and spare me their crocodile tears. I'm not that interested in how they're going to howl injustice at this point. But it is a real problem for America. They should change the laws. And I don't know if Susan Rice did it for national security reasons or for political reasons, but it is troubling either way. Podcast The Young Turks anytime you want. tytnetwork.com/join.
I think it's weird.
No, it's not weird. In fact, you'll think,
I'm like a smart person.
Do it now. tytnetwork.com/join.